Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very thankful that you all could join me once again. We just left off where the Ten Commandments were given unto Moses and the Israelites. Now, those were the commandments of God. Now we're coming upon Exodus 21, and it's one of the most controversial chapters. If there's any aha chapters that the atheists like to use against us believers, they would point usually to Exodus 21. There's a couple of other ones that they also point to, but Exodus 21 is that big one that they'll always say, oh man, how can you explain away all of this? Well, I mean, very easily. It's not difficult at all to understand once that you begin to dig into the culture back then. But right off the bat, we have to understand this. God just gave 10 commandments. Now he is giving his judgments. Judgments and commandments are two different things. A commandment is you will do this. A judgment is you should do this. And with the commandments, you are dealing with God if you break them. If you break one of his commandments, then you're dealing with God. But if you break one of his judgments, then it simply is the Israelites, the judges of Israel. You will be dealt with by man because you've took the bad advice. You've took the wrong way, not the way that God said you should take. You took the one that you decided to. Now these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. If thou buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. For anyone who has ever seen Django Unchained, starring Jamie Foxx and Leonardo DiCaprio, and whatever, it's about this former slave who he's set free, and he takes revenge upon his old slavers. This is one of the old slavers that would beat him in the movie. And if you'll notice these pieces of paper on his attire, these are Bible pages. These are pages from the Bible. And in his left hand, he has a Bible, and in his right hand, he has a whip. Kind of showing how the Bible teaches slavery. Now, this is one of the big main gripes that atheists have against Exodus 21. Well, it promotes slavery, and never does. Not one time. And we'll get to that right here in a second. But Hollywood has a really bad habit of saying that the Bible is antiquated and is pro-slavery. And right here you have another movie, 12 Years a Slave, where they tried to place the Bible right in the midst of slavery, and it's supposed to justify it in some way. And once again, Exodus 21 is pretty much the main chapter that they always point to say, look, the Bible promotes slavery. Here's a few quick facts about the Bible and slavery. In the KJV, the King James Version, the words slave and slaves are only used once. In the KJV, slave is used in the Old Testament one time, the word, and slaves is used in the New Testament one time. The word slavery itself is never mentioned. Not one mention of the word slavery. Servitude was mutually agreed upon, mostly to pay off debts. This was not a forced kidnapping of someone, and by the way, this chapter addresses kidnapping, and it goes against it very much. But this was not a taking someone against their will and forcing them to serve you. No, the Bible does never ever promote that. It goes the exact opposite, as a matter of fact. Servitude was mutually agreed upon, mostly to pay off debts, always limited to 6 years, not lifelong. God did not want someone to be in servitude forever. He wanted them to just, if you got a debt to pay, no matter how big that it is, let them go after 6 years. The treatment of the servant was highly regulated. You could not, by any means, harm your servant in a malicious manner. There's no whippings going on. There's none of this, taking them and raping them like they show in the movies. And 12 Years a Slave actually shows the slaver raping one of his slaves over and over again. And I don't mean to be so graphic, but this is not what the Bible ever promotes in any shape, form, or fashion. The servant could even become a permanent member of the family if they chose. Oftentimes, the servant would, because they were indebted to them, so they were serving them. And if they loved being with the family, they could become part of the family. Now, tell me, what slave actually becomes part of the family? They actually chooses willingly after the 6 years to say, I want to stay with them. I legitly, and it goes further and says that they love the family so much that they are brought into being a part of. G. Campbell Morgan, in his commentary regarding this particular subject, was speaking of the judgments. A careful consideration of the judgments will show that they abolished slavery and substituted for it covenanted labor. This was basically saying you can become an employee of mine, a maid servant, a bond servant. We do see those words in the scripture. A bond servant, it's a servant that is bonded to a particular household. And then you have a maid servant. It's a maid is all that they are. You're not allowed to hurt them. They're not, and if you do hurt them, they go free from their debt. And as we see in verse 2, in the 7th year, they went free for nothing at all anyway, so they're set free. If he came in by himself, talking about the servant, if he came in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master have given him a wife, and she have borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. Meaning that the head of the household, it's still his family. Like a servant can't just come in, marry someone, and then take away his family from him. So the head of the household, the master, actually has still that kind of authority over his daughters or whatever. And if the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him in unto the judges. He shall also bring him to the door, or unto the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. Now, an awl is simply something that it's piercing the ear, basically. And we see how people in whom own livestock, how they pierce the ear of their livestock. And it goes right back to what I said in the last session about how Paul says, henceforth let no man trouble me, for I bear in my body the marks of Christ. The marks of Christ, okay? He says, I am owned by Christ. I'm a bondservant to Christ. Just as how a shepherd may tag the ear of his livestock, his sheep, so are we tagged because of our servitude. Now notice it says in the verse that the servant says, I love my master, I love my family, please allow me to stay. And right whenever they say, I want to join you, allow me to stay and serve you forever, then they take him and they pierce his earlobe, and they mark him. He's marked after that. He's tagged as part of the family, just like a sheep is to the shepherd. Jesus said in Matthew 21:11, but he that is greatest among you shall be your servant, and whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased, and he that shall humble himself shall be exalted. In Philippians, Paul tells us more about Christ. But Christ made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. Christ came down here to serve. And he says, let the greatest among you be a servant to all. Let him first serve. Remember whenever he's washing the feet of his disciples, and they tell him, no, 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 you're the greatest being that's ever been. And he says, if I don't wash your feet, then you have no part of me. He says, I serve, and then I'm served. He says, it's part of it. We have to become servants down here. Okay, so this servitude topic, how it holds far greater connotations than what we give it credit for. Charles Spurgeon once said, do not desire to be the principal man in the church. Be lowly, be humble. The best man in the church is the one who is willing to be a doormat for all to wipe their boots on. The brother who does not mind what happens to him at all, so long as God is glorified. Be the servant, be the greatest of servants. Let the principal man, the most important man, be the servant of all. So the Bible is not against servants and masters, but it is against slavery. And we'll find out right here in just a second about that. But notice again, it says, to the servant who wants to stay with the family, let the head of the household, the master, bring him unto the judges. He shall also bring him to the door or into the door post. Okay? Great significance right here. So remember, the first thing that we noted was boring one's ear through. Okay? As a servant, we do the same as with the sheep to a shepherd. Now let's focus on this door. What's the possible implications behind this door, the great significance behind it, this foreshadowing behind this door? I really like what I heard on the radio the other day by Adrian Rogers. He said, God so wants to show us his son that he shows us, just like a good parent. Have you ever had a parent show them the child that they love? They'll come up and they'll show picture after picture on their phone of them, and they'll just show you picture after picture after picture of them. All of these foreshadowings of Christ, like Joseph and Abraham sacrificing Isaac, and the ram showing up right at the last time, the Passover, all of these are showings of Christ. And it's just like how they're showing you many, many pictures before you meet the actual person. These are just pictures of Christ. It's all pictures of Christ. The whole Bible is just God showing us his lovely son, and showing us exactly what he would do. And it's beautiful. But now it's focused on this door. Then said Jesus unto them again, verily, verily, I say unto you, I am the door of the sheep. I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture. So yeah, I do believe that this is showing us something far deeper, okay? Because these very same servants that love their masters are kind of representing the whole world's servants to Christ, and how we love him so much, and the Father, how we bear the marks of Christ now, just like Christ did. Christ says, take up your cross like me, be persecuted like me, spread the gospel like me. We're to follow in the footsteps of Christ, just like sheep follow in the footsteps of their great shepherd. And if a man sell his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as the men servants do. If you were to look into the history of that particular culture at that time, you would have seen that there were two, probably more, reasons behind why a man would sell his daughter into someone else's home. First of all, probably the most prevalent was that he had a debt, and she would go in as a maid for 6 years, and she would be helping her father. We see this today. Well, I know plenty of young girls who are teenagers. They go and work at McDonald's because their parents have trouble paying the bills. So she's just trying to help out the family. Well, here's another reason too, and this may have been a more prevalent reason. I'm not for sure, but also if it was arranged that, remember how Jesus says that many are given in marriages. That means that the daughter is given in a marriage to another family's son. So if the father of this daughter desired her to be part of this other family, to grow up with this family, then there would be an arrangement made, an agreement between the two families. Okay, my daughter is going to marry your son's going to marry my daughter. Well, bring the daughter on over to us and we will see if she fits in, if she likes being with him, if she likes being with the family, if they fall in love, if they don't. It would be a type of dating for a while. And we're not talking about 6 7 years old. We're talking probably 13 14, something like that, I guess. But the commentary was very, very plain on it. If she please not her master who hath betrothed her to himself, then, see, notice, if she please not her master who hath betrothed her to himself, so this is a marriage arrangement. This is a marriage arrangement. This isn't just bringing a girl on in, making her a slave, and beating her up. Not has nothing to do with that. This is a marriage arrangement. Betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed. Okay, so the family can give him some money and bring her back on over. And this was anytime during the 6 years. Okay, to sell her unto a strange nation he shall have no power, seeing he hath dealt deceitfully with her. He tells her, no, I don't want to marry you. So he's not allowed to try to have other people buy her from them. This is not a slave, this is a person. Okay. And if he have betrothed her unto his son, he shall deal with her after the manner of daughters. Now, what kind of slave was ever treated as a daughter? If he take him another wife, her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage shall not be diminished. It says that you will continue to treat her well. You will not take away from her simply because another wife has been chosen. You will treat her well, even afterwards. And if he do not these three unto her, then shall she go out free without money. And it says if you don't want to continue treating her as a daughter, as a member of the family, then you have to let her go. She's not to stay right there and just be a slave for you. No, let her go. He that smiteth a man so that he die shall be surely put to death. Notice it doesn't say if you kill a man, send him to a prison. Doesn't say that. There's no prisons in the Bible. Okay. What you'll see is if it is a known murder, that man's killed. I get a kick out of what comedian Ron White says. He says, in Texas, we have the death penalty, and we use it. That's right. If you come to Texas and kill somebody, we will kill you back. Now, here's the United States of America's states with death penalty and states without. The green is the states without the death penalty. The red is all the states with the death penalty. I actually wasn't 100% for sure if my state of Tennessee had the death penalty. And I don't think that a lot of these are surprises to me. Just coming right back to Texas real quick, we see the state of Texas has executed 569 people since 1982. Of these, 279 occurred during the administration of Texas Governor Rick Perry from 2001 to 2014. That's quite a few executions, more than any other governor in U.S. history. Texas Governor Rick Perry from 2001 to 2014. Executions peaked in Texas in 2000 when 40 people were put to death. The state of Texas put 9 people to death in 2019 compared with 13 executions in 2018. It was one of 7 states responsible for the 22 executions nationwide in 2019. You see, now back in biblical days, what they were doing was far more effective. I guarantee you, because it was a known thing. Remember, I just told you how I wasn't for sure if Tennessee even still had the death penalty. As many people don't know if their states still have the death penalty. If people knew that their states 100% have the death penalty and that they'll kill you quickly, you would see crime rates just drop drastically. I have no doubt about it. During this coronavirus outbreak, we're seeing how many people are being set free from prisons, even murderers, people charged with murder, convicted of murder. And we're seeing how they're let loose from prison and coming out and still killing people. Colorado inmate released on parole because of coronavirus, arrested in fatal Denver shooting. May 15th, 2020. This was less than 2 weeks ago. Cornelius Haney, 40, is accused of first-degree murder in the slaying of 21-year-old Heather Perry. He was released from prison following a March 25th executive order from Governor Jared Polis. Florida inmate released amid pandemic killed someone the next day, officials say. Joseph Edward Williams shot and killed a man in Tampa, Florida on March 20th, the authorities said, one day after he was among more than 160 inmates released from Hillsborough County jails. Now, if we... I'm not even getting into the fact that he killed someone after being freed. What irks me is, why was this man put in prison? It's like, okay, you killed somebody, all right? You killed somebody, and here's your punishment. We're going to put you up in a room. You'll have a couple people with you. Sometimes you won't have anybody with you. But we're going to put you up in a room. We're going to feed you 3 times a day. You get to exercise. You get to do whatever. You don't have to work. Just stay there. Don't move. Taxpayers will flip the bill. Taxpayers will pay for it. Don't worry about it. That is it's Ken Hovind has a really good segment on this. If you just look up on YouTube, Ken Hovind, Exodus 21, he talks about how he went to prison for almost 9 years, and he talks about it in his book, The Kennel, how the prison system is just one big money racket. It's just one big money racket. How people in the senators and such, how they own stock in the prison system, so the more prisoners that they get, the longer they're held, the more funding they're going to get, and all of this and all of that. And I do advise everyone to watch that one. But this is just utterly absurd to me. If this man knew that after he killed someone, the next day or immediately after it was found out that he intentionally committed this murder and he was killed the next day, if he had that kind of knowledge deep back into his brain, I guarantee you he wouldn't have went on out here and killed anyone. I was watching this documentary about the monster of the Andes, Pedro Alonso Lopez, who it's believed kidnapped, raped, and murdered about 350 females, ranging from just little kids to women. And he actually says during this documentary, they're filming him, and they already know that he's a murderer and serial killer and all this. And he actually says at one point, he says,
¿Esto quiere la historia, sí o no? Si me van a pasar el pareón, yo estoy muy joven para morir.
Lopez seemed proud of raping and murdering so many young girls. He said the grave sites were scattered all over the country.
The audacity, the sheer, the evil. And he says it, and you're left with your jaw dropped, thinking, you're too young to die? You killed little girls. You killed little babies. You destroyed their bodies before you even killed them. And he's too young to die. If he would have known, though, once you're caught, you're dead, because he was just put up, I think he only got like a 16-year sentence because they don't allow the death penalty down there. But if you put that kind of fear in them, notice the fear that he had. I hope that this don't come back to get me because I'm too young to die. It's like, what kind of judicial system allows a monster like this to live? Like, kill him the next day. And if a man lie not in wait, but God deliver him into his hand, then I will appoint thee a place whither he shall flee. We'll learn later about these cities of refuge, because the judicial process is still very important to God. This is protecting, these judgments are to protect everyone. It runs the gamut. It protects the richest to the poorest, the accused and the accuser. It protects everyone. The servant, the master, it protects everyone. These judgments do. Completely fair. Let's just say that you're a poor farmer back then. you're a poor farmer, and yeah, I see this all the time today. They say that there's no justice if you're poor, but the rich get away with everything. We see this today. It's a very common thing. Whenever a celebrity gets in trouble, they just immediately get out of it. A senator gets in trouble, he just immediately gets out of it 99% of the time. But if you're a poor old boy like one of us, like, you don't get away with anything. But these judgments are to take care of everyone. God says, okay, if you're going to do this, this is the fairest way to do it. And this is pointing later on to these cities of refuge. I believe there was about 6 cities of refuge that the Israelites had. But the accused could run, the criminal, whoever committed this murder or accidentally manslaughter, whatever, if they accidentally killed someone, then they could flee into a city of refuge. And they could wait for the judicial process to take place. Wait for all the witnesses, let's hear his case and everything, because the family's going to immediately want vengeance. So they could flee to these cities of refuge, and that's what this verse is talking about. But if a man come presumptuously upon his neighbor to slay him with guile, meaning he's angry at him and he wants to kill him, thou shalt take him from mine altar that he may die. Okay, and after King David, whenever he is dying, and his successor Solomon is about to be named king, his 4th son Adonijah desires to usurp the throne from Solomon, and he's another one of David's sons. And Adonijah tries to go through all the steps to become king, and once that it's found out, though, and Solomon becomes the king, it's a very hurried process. But once that they finally go through it and Solomon becomes king before Adonijah can go through all the rites and all, Adonijah runs up to the altar and grabs hold of the horns of the altar, and it protects him. It's considered sacred ground. Even in pagan cultures, they would consider it, in some of them, they would consider it like sacred ground. Don't kill anybody, don't shed any blood on that ground. Well, right here, God says, don't worry about if they're on the altar. He says, take them from the altar and slay them if it's premeditated murder. And he that smiteth his father or his mother shall be surely put to death. Now, mind you, this doesn't just go for kids or teenagers of parents, even though we see a lot of these kids killing their parents nowadays. Back then, they used as a death sentence for you. But anyway, this is also talking about all throughout their life. If a 40-year-old man desired to kill his father, then he's put to death for that. Right here we read of a recent incident. 40-year-old man accused of killing his parents owed them $17,000. Oklahoma cops say the love of money is the root of all evil. He didn't want to pay him back. Right here's the 40-year-old man. Right here's his parents. And the Tulsa Police Department posted this. We have arrested Brian Spence for the murder of his parents, Beverly and Joseph Spence. The investigation is still ongoing. Whenever I was reading the article, it says that these 2 people on over here, his parents, they were the nicest, they were the best people in the entire community. They were good church goers. They always happy, always willing to support anyone in need and such. And this man, because he owed them, so nice that he owed them $17,000. They loaned $17,000 to their son, and he comes back and kills them. Back in the days of Moses, we wouldn't put scum like this in a prison. He is dead. He would not have made it this far. There's no way he would have made it as long as he already has. Here's another case. U.S. former Marine kills parents and 2 family dogs, confesses murder to police while wearing bloodied shirt. Yeah, he's a former Marine, killed his family, or killed his parents and the dogs, and walks right on into the police and bloodied shirt and all and says that he did it. He just recently pled not guilty to the crime. And he that stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. This, for anyone who believes that the servants mentioned earlier in this chapter was talking about the slaves that we know in our time, This is a clear distinction between the two. And he that kidnaps a man, takes him, and sells him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. Slavers are put to death in the Bible. It's absurd. It's almost like atheists can't read. And he that curseth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. They actually, whenever I was doing some studies about this about a year or so ago, there's not one documented case where a child or a son or a daughter was ever put to death. We cannot find any historical evidence that this was actually put into effect or that this ever had to be. So I believe that the fear of it alone kept people from doing this, and this was to maintain a measure of respect from generation to generation. Because God says in his commandments, honor thy father and thy mother. If you don't, we'll kill you. Nowadays, you hear kids just back talking. In South Park, you got, what's his name? Cartman. I can't remember his first name, but Cartman, the little fat one, he's always, cussing his mom, and he's just total disrespect. And people say, well, it's not a big deal, man. It's not a big deal if you're 30 years old and watching it. It's a huge deal if you're about 10 years old and watching it. The kids are so easily influenced. If you've ever hung around a kid for 2 weeks, you'll start noticing they'll start mimicking what you're doing. They'll start talking like you're talking. They'll start using words that you're using, verbiage, vocabulary. They're like sponges. They soak this kind of stuff up, and they think it's cool, and he sits around just all the time talking to his mom, just completely down on everybody. It's the most disrespectful little thing I've ever seen in my life. But our society today tolerates it. Back then, it was not tolerated. And you're looked at as a prude or a square or whatever now. You're just uncool. You're not with the times. If you try to admonish kids to respect their parents or whatever. And if men strive together, meaning they get into a dispute, and one smite another with a stone or with his fist, and he die not, but keepeth his bed, meaning if he injures him and really badly hurts him, and so he's got to go onto like a hospital bed. If he rise again and walk abroad upon his staff, then shall he that smote him be quit. Only he shall pay for the loss of his time, and shall cause him to be thoroughly healed. So what this is basically saying is, let's just say that you got into it with a guy at work, and you all got into it, and you started fist fighting. If you hit him and he hit his head on the ground or on a rock, or you took a rock and hit him or whatever, and he had to go to the hospital and had to stay in the hospital, he was in a coma or something, the entire time that he's in the hospital, you have to take care of his expenses. You have to take care of his family. You have to take care of everything that he would normally have to take care of. But if he comes out of that and he's fine and he's able to go back to work, then you stop taking care of it. Only you should pay for the loss of his time, meaning giving back the money that he would have gained at that time, and shall cause him to be thoroughly healed. So you'll pay for his medical expenses. And if a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod, and he die under his hand, he shall be surely punished. This is totally the opposite of the way that slavery a few hundred years ago in America was. Back then, they were looked at as property. If you wanted to kill one of your slaves, you could do it. Never be punished for it. They were only your property. Right here, it's saying, no, your maid, your servant, they're people. You will be punished for harming them. Notwithstanding, if he continue a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his money. So this is taking up for the victim, which is the maid or the servant. And then in this verse, it's taking up for the master, the head of the house. And it says, if your servant is seen to be alive for a day or two afterwards, then you'll not be punished. And the reasoning behind that is because if you wanted to kill your servant or your maid, you would do it probably that day because there's no one around to stop you. So if you wanted to kill somebody, and yet if they come up hurt in your house, and let's just say that they're in a coma or something, and they're hurt and they're laid up in a bed for a day or two, then that's going to be a witness that you didn't try to kill them. That could have been an accident. Something else could have happened to them, whatever, some kind of health problem. But it's obvious at that point that you didn't try to kill them. Now, for he is his money. This money word right here is translated in other versions, corrupted versions, outside of the KJV to be property. That is not the same word. It's just like with my employer. I'm not their property. I am not the employer's property. Not at all. If I have a debt to pay, if I owe them anything, then I'm trying to pay it off or something like that. If I have someone that I owe and I'm working on their farm and I owe them some money and I can't get money, I can't get a job anywhere else, so I go and I work for them on their farm. We see this, Jacob does this with Laban, and he does it for 14 years just to marry his daughters. He's not a slave at all. He knows that that's the payment for marrying his daughters, so he goes and he does this. Well, that's the debt that he owes to Laban for marrying his daughters. That's the payment. That's the money that he owes him. He'd work on his farm and that's it. Jacob at no time, though, is his property. Laban can never say, hey, you're not allowed to leave, you're my property or whatever. No, it's like, no, if you leave, then the debt remains, or you're not allowed to marry my daughters. The deal's off. If men strive and hurt a woman with child, so that her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief follow, he shall be surely punished, according as the woman's husband will lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. Now basically what those verses are saying, if two men are arguing and they get into like a fist fight, and one of the men has a pregnant wife, and she gets involved trying to break it up or something, and she just so happens to be hurt by the other man, pushes her down or something. If she still has the baby and everything's fine, the punishment for the initial harm is that the husband of her gets to set upon him so much punishment, whatever it is. It may be monetary punishment, some kind of money payment for that. But if the baby dies, or if the wife dies, then we're told about it's life for life. He must die, according to that. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. You see, what this verse in particular does is says that the penalty will be just, and it will be a fair penalty. It will be eye for an eye, not an eye for two eyes. This is all a balancing chapter. It's a balancing. It's God saying, with all of the things that you all have and all of these, the horrible situations that you all have gotten yourselves into, he says, this is the most balanced way to go about it. That's what this entire chapter is. It's God, his giving his judgment, saying, this is the best way to go about it. This is the fairest way. Burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. And if a man smite the eye of his servant or the eye of his maid, that it perish, he shall let him go for free for his eye's sake. Now tell me, how many slaves back in the day, if they lost one of their eyes, were blinded by one of their slavers, how many of them were allowed to be set free after that? Nope, you're not set free after that. You're going to work partly blind. And if he smite out his manservant's tooth or his maidservant's tooth, he shall let him go for free for his tooth's sake. But wouldn't that be pretty nice? Let's just say that you owe a debt for $50,000 to a family, and you go and you start working for them, and 3 days into it, one of them punches you and you lose your tooth. Well, the debt's paid off. You're allowed to go. That's all right. I would almost put myself in that position to lose a tooth. I'd lose a tooth for that. If an ox gore a man or a woman that they die, then the ox shall be surely stoned, and his flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be quit. Just so you all know, this word quit is basically acquitted. Okay, so they're not found responsible. It's not the owner of the ox's fault that the ox went crazy one day and killed a man or a woman, and so they just kill the beast. The owner does not take part in any of its meat. It's simply to be killed. So there's no gain whatsoever from the owner. But if the ox were wont to push with his horn in time past, and it hath been testified to his owner, and he hath not kept him in, but that he hath killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and his owner also shall be put to death. Meaning that if the ox had shown previous aggression like this, and the owner allowed him to keep going, knowing that he was an aggressive ox, and the ox just one day kills a man or a woman, then both the ox and the owner of the ox would be put to death because he had knowledge of it. If there be laid on him a sum of money, then he shall give for the ransom of his life whatsoever is laid upon him. So let's just say that the victim's family, whomever the ox killed, if the victim's family didn't wish for the owner of the ox to be killed, then he could simply pay money and get out of it. But the ox would be killed. Whether he have gored a son or have gored a daughter, according to this judgment shall it be done unto him. If the ox shall push a manservant or maidservant, he shall give unto their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. So if someone had a servant and the ox came up and became very aggressive and actually hit them or something, injured them, then the master of the ox would have to pay the master of the maidservant 30 shekels of silver, which is about $600 in today's money. So basically, this is if an ox shows aggression, if man or beast show aggression, then there's a punishment for it. It's like God is saying no matter what. If you're in debt, if you're master of the house, if you got servants, whatever, all of you be at peace with one another. All of you get along. These are the judgments of God, which is so upsetting that atheists try to say how tyrannical God is and how he's a dictator and everything, whenever he just desires peace. And Jesus is called the Prince of Peace. It's beautiful. And if a man shall open a pit, or if a man shall dig a pit and not cover it, and an ox or an ass fall therein, the owner of the pit shall make it good and give money unto the owner of them, and the dead beast shall be his. They would often dig these holes in the ground in order to preserve grain or to trap animals. But if someone's ox came around, fell into the pit, then the man who dug the pit, if the beast died, then he would give money unto the family, and he would get to keep the dead beast that went up in there. So he would just pay them for the ox that died. And if one man's ox hurt another's that he die, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the money of it, and the dead ox also they shall divide. So it was, all right, here you go. I'm getting rid of this aggressive ox, and your ox is dead. So whatever I sell, I'm going to split the money with you, and they also get to split the meat of the ox. Or if it be known that the ox hath used to push in time past, and his owner hath not kept him in, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead shall be his own. So once again, we see how his ox is put to death, and because the ox didn't kill a person, but it killed another ox, then he'll have to pay for the ox that it killed and put his to death. But no harm comes to him. But that is the lesson for Exodus 21. You see, that's one of the most controversial chapters in the entire Bible. And do you see how it's got such a good balance to it and such, how there's such a great message within it, but the atheist will paint it as the most evil thing in the world. We just went through it, word for word. King James. I don't know. But anyway, possibly tomorrow, Lord willing, we're going to be getting into Exodus 22. Thank you all for joining me tonight. God a peace be with you. Amen.